A Considerable Speck by Robert Frost. Now imagine you're writing, and as you work, you notice a tiny speck of dust on your paper. At first, it seems insignificant, just a small speck. However, it feels like this tiny dot is somehow disrupting your writing and making it harder for you to focus. Now, even though it's too small to see clearly with just your eyes, it still affects you and your work in a noticeable way. In A Considerable Speck, Robert Frost narrates an encounter with a tiny, almost invisible speck, a speck of dust to be precise, that lands on the speaker's page. Now, the poem explores how this speck, while minuscule, draws the speaker's attention and evokes a sense of wonder about its significance. The speck becomes a symbol of the delicate balance between what is important and what is trivial. A speck that would have been beneath my sight on any but a paper sheet so white. Now, here the poet notices a tiny speck on his paper, something he wouldn't usually pay attention to if it weren't for the contrast of the white sheet. Normally, it would go unnoticed, but because it stands out, he can't help but observe it. So, the poet uses contrast between the tiny speck and the white paper, highlighting its visibility and importance to the poet. Sets off across what I had written there. Now, this speck starts moving across the words the poet had written, like an unexpected guest or an unexpected visitor disrupting his thoughts. He's curious, but he's also ready to stop it in its tracks. And I had idly poised my pen in air to stop it with a period of ink. Here the poet lifts his pen, getting ready to squash the speck with a simple dot of ink. It's a casual, almost automatic reaction, like someone about to swat a fly without a second thought. Here, Frost is both literally and playfully using words, and he's thinking of using a punctuation mark, just a tiny dot of ink to end the speck's journey. In doing so, he hints at how something so small could easily be erased from existence. The pun on the word period suggests both a stop in writing and an end to the speck's life. When something strange about it made me think. But then, just as he's about to squash it, something stops him. The poet realizes that this isn't just a speck of dust, it's alive. This small mite has a purpose, a sense of life, and something changes in the poet's mind. He's no longer indifferent to it. This was no dust speck by my breathing blown. The poet realizes that this speck didn't get there by accident. It's not just dust moved by the wind or by his breath. It's a living creature with its own will, but unmistakably a living mite with inclinations it could call its own. Now, Frost sees that this tiny mite has its own mind, its own desires, and is consciously moving across the page. This changes the way the poet thinks about it. No longer an insignificant speck, it becomes a being worthy of respect. So, in this passage, Frost's mind shifts from indifference to wonder. At first, he sees the mite as an annoyance, something to be erased with a flick of his pen. But then he pauses, realizing that even this creature has life, intelligence, and its own purpose. So it's a profound moment where Frost goes from thinking like a writer, ready to make a correction, to a philosopher pondering over life. The mite becomes a symbol of consciousness and will, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem at first. It paused, as with suspicion of my pen. Now the mite seems to sense the poet's pen hovering above it, as if it's suspicious of what the poet is about to do. It shows awareness, as though it knows it's in danger and is considering its next move. Now, this gives the tiny creature a sense of intelligence and caution. The mite is personified here, and it is given human like qualities of suspicion and hesitation. And then came racing wildly on again. After its brief pause, the mite resumes its frantic scurrying across the paper, seemingly in a rush to escape from the pen's looming presence. It acts as if it's running for its life, which adds a bit of drama and urgency to this small scene. To where my manuscript was not yet dry. The mite runs to a part of the page where the ink from the poet's writing is still fresh and wet. This sets the stage for the next moment where the mite interacts with the ink. Then paused again and either drank or smelt with loathing, for again it turned to fly. The mite stops again, perhaps to taste or sniff the wet ink, but whatever it encounters repulses it. It's disgusted by the ink and quickly turns to escape once more. This moment is humorous because the mite's reaction is so exaggerated, as though it's critiquing the poet's writing. And Frost uses irony here. The mite reacts as if the ink is unpleasant, turning an ordinary moment into something amusing. Plainly, with an intelligence I dealt, the poet recognizes that he is dealing with a conscious, thinking creature, not just a mindless speck. The mite's quick reactions show that it is aware and has its own sense of survival. Now, this line emphasizes the theme of life and intelligence even in the tiniest beings. It seemed too tiny to have room for feet. Now, Frost marvels at how small the mite is, so tiny that it's hard to imagine it even has feet. Yet, despite its size, it's clearly able to move with purpose and precision. Yet, must have had a set of them complete to express how much it didn't want to die. Now, though the mite is very tiny, minuscule, it's obvious to the poet that it has all the necessary tools, like its feet, to express its strong desire to live. The mite's frantic movements are a clear message. It's doing everything it can to survive. Now, Frost is struck by this creature's will to live, even though it's so small that it could easily be dismissed as insignificant. Here, the poet uses hyperbole to exaggerate how tiny the mite is, emphasizing its smallness compared to the poet's pen. So, this passage highlights Frost's ability to find significance in the smallest moments of life. The mite, though tiny, becomes a symbol of life's resilience and intelligence. The poet's changing attitude from casual observer to someone deeply engaged in the mite's struggle illustrates the deeper theme of respect for all forms of life, no matter how insignificant they may seem at first glance. It ran with terror and with cunning crept. The mite is now in full survival mode. It's terrified, running frantically to avoid the poet's pen, but it's also smart enough to move carefully and cautiously, trying to avoid any immediate danger. This shows both its fear and its instinctive cleverness in staying alive. The mite's actions, running with terror and creeping cunningly, is a personification as its actions are described in human like terms. It faltered. I could see it hesitate. The mite hesitates, unsure of what to do next. It pauses, probably trying to figure out its next move in an attempt to escape the danger. The poet sees this hesitation, which adds to his perception that this creature has its own intelligence and self awareness. Then, in the middle of the open sheet, cower down in desperation to accept whatever I accorded it of fate. The mite finds itself in the middle of the white sheet of paper, totally exposed, without any place to hide. This creates a sense of vulnerability for the tiny creature as it has no way to escape or protect itself from the poet's looming pen. Realizing it has no escape, the mite crouches down and, almost as if surrendering to whatever fate the poet decides for it. Now, the mite seems to accept its helplessness, leaving its fate in the poet's hands. This moment makes the poet feel the weight of his power over this tiny life. Here, the metaphor is used to express the mite's helplessness, with fate symbolizing the poet's power to decide whether it should live or die. I have none of the tenderer than thou collectivistic regimenting love with which the modern world is being swept. The poet shifts gears here, moving from his focus on the mite to a reflection on society. He states that he doesn't share the tenderer than thou attitude that many people in the modern world adopt, a kind of overly sentimental collectivistic approach to love and care. In other words, he is not interested in following society's trend of treating everyone with a generalized, forced compassion. Now, in this passage, it is revealed that Frost has a deep thinking about life, individuality, and modern society. The mite's struggle for survival stirs in him a sense of responsibility, but he also uses this moment to critique the way modern society tends to force empathy and care in an almost mechanical way. For Frost, real understanding and compassion come from observing and thinking for oneself, not from being swept up in societal trends. The mite becomes a symbol for individual life and the importance of authentic personal reactions to the world around us. But this poor microscopic item now. The poet refers to the mite as a poor microscopic item, acknowledging how small and insignificant it seems compared to him. He feels some pity for the tiny creature but also recognizes its presence in his life, no matter how small. Since it was nothing I knew evil of, I let it lie there till I hope it slept. The poet decides that he has no reason to harm the mite because it hasn't done anything wrong. It's just a tiny creature, innocent and harmless, so there's no point in hurting it. This shows the poet's thoughtful and fair attitude towards the mite. Rather than killing or harming the mite, the poet leaves it alone, hoping that it might rest or sleep. This shows a kind and merciful side to the poet who chooses to spare the life of the tiny creature. There's also a bit of humor in imagining a mite sleeping peacefully on the paper. Now, personification is at play here as the poet imagines the mite sleeping, attributing human like qualities to the small creature. I have a mind myself, and recognize mind when I meet with it in any guise. The poet reflects that he has intelligence and a mind of his own, and he can recognize intelligence or mind in other beings, even in something as tiny as the mite. The poet is impressed that the mite, though small, shows signs of having its own will and awareness. Metaphor is used here when Frost talks about mind in any guise, meaning he can see intelligence even in unexpected forms like this tiny creature. No one can know how glad I am to find on any sheet the least display of mind. The poet feels a sense of joy when he sees intelligence or life, even in the smallest or most unexpected places, like a mite on his paper. For Frost, discovering signs of life and thought even in a mite is a pleasant surprise and a reminder that intelligence and purpose can be found everywhere. Irony plays a role here as the poet takes pleasure in finding a display of mind on a sheet of paper where he expected nothing more than his own writing. The smallest thing, the mite, brings him a profound realization. So, in this passage, Frost reveals his deep respect for life and intelligence, even in its tiniest forms. The poet finds himself in an unexpected moral dilemma, whether or not to harm the mite, and chooses to let it live because he sees no evil in it. He recognizes that, like him, the mite has its own mind, and this connection gives him a sense of joy. This realization highlights his appreciation for the complexities of life and how intelligence can manifest in even the most surprising ways. I hope you found this explanation of Robert Frost's A Considerable Speck insightful and engaging. Understanding the delicate balance between the tiny and the significant in this poem can truly enhance our appreciation of Frost's work. If you have any questions or would like to dive deeper into this poem, be sure to visit my channel where I will add the links to detailed questions, answers, and multiple choice questions to test your understanding. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update from Literary Leap. Share your thoughts and questions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.